Hey everybody, Andy from Tennis Euphoria, and after adopting the Yonex Ezone 98 2025 as my frame for 10 days, I'm delighted to bring you a review on it. My frame was on spec, which is not surprising with Yonex, their quality control is always great. I strung with Polytour Pro 1.25 gauge at £52, but I did change that setup with great improvement, which I'll discuss later. With the Yonex, I like to give them a little bit of time around engineering updates when I review their frames, because generally speaking, I found that what they claim does tend to come through in playtesting in terms of changes and enhancements. We still have 2G NAND and VDM mesh dampening in the handle, but we have a different frame with an expanded top of the frame. It's also been widened in terms of the beam width at the top, and they've also extended the tapered inner frame. Now, they claim that that delivers a bigger sweet spot, more responsiveness, and a change in the flex. We also have the addition of Minolon fibers, which supposedly is spun through worms. Not sure about that. But in terms of assessing feel, I can tell you that there is quite a big difference in the feel of this Ezone compared to the ones that have passed it. Opportunistically, I was able to hit very gently initially with the frame with a customer and friend who I've been helping rehab back to being on court after a nasty shoulder injury. So hitting at sort of 30-40% down the middle was actually quite helpful, just to get a sense for how it felt next to others Ezones, and it is much softer, more plush than other Ezones. I also think that one benefit of that is it's more comfortable too. Now, is that a good thing? It is if you like a softer and plush feel, of course, and if you like the sensation of a little bit more dwell time on the strings. I suppose the complication with Yonex frames is that the VDM mesh does dampen things a little bit, and some often say that they're not quite as connected to the feel as some others, but of course that is very subjective. I think that the change, though, is certainly determined and significant in terms of this is a much softer and plusher playing frame than the previous. Of course, the risk with softening a frame and taking down the RA, which is what I expect they have done, could come with a lack of power. But I think predominantly those Minolon fibers are behind the softer sensation. And one thing that I think is really quite impressive about this frame is that when you consider it from a power generation perspective, I think that it retains the similar power levels that you would have enjoyed in the previous Ezone 98s. So that's quite an achievement, and I'm sure that comes from the changes in the design of the frame itself, that expanded frame at the top and the widened beam width at the top, whilst fairly minimal, is actually quite significant in terms of it retains the energy return despite it being softer. And I think that's quite a clever engineering achievement. I don't think that this is hugely more powerful than the previous. So I think if you're looking to update from the previous, expecting to get loads more power from this compared to the previous, then you might be disappointed. But Yonex claim that the changes have increased the size of the sweet spot, and I'm inclined to agree with that. So I think that when you're hitting with this next to the other, you're more regularly getting a good connection and you're getting less fluttering. So you probably could have a sensation or a sort of misinterpretation that you're getting a cleaner ball strike, a more regular clean strike, and more power, whereas actually you're just connecting in the sweet spot a bit more regularly. But certainly I would feel next to each other, there's not a huge change in power. So of course, one potential expense of having the expanded frame at the top and the widened beam would be a slowdown in maneuverability. And I didn't find that to be the case. I think it's subtle enough, we're literally talking millimeters, to add that little bit of power back from the softening of the frame. But we still have something that's very fast through the air, and it isn't noticeable that it's been slowed down at all. So that leads me on to stability, because we have potentially a larger sweet spot and something that is a little bit thicker at the top. And I think that stability is much better than the previous version. You notice that on volleys, you notice that in general hitting, but also with the two previous, I've felt inclined to increase the swing weight a little, to increase stability and its twist weight. So I'd added 3 and 9, some lead, and also had typically played with leather grips on the previous editions, and I didn't feel the need to customize these current 2025 versions at all. And so I think that is a big improvement in stability. That could maybe damage sales for any upcoming Ezone tour that Yonex are planning, because I think this has such good stability now that it's difficult to justify going with anything that would be heavier but with similar specs otherwise. So who is the Ezone 98 for? Last year in playtesting, obviously it would appeal to players who are wanting some control and a 98 square inch head size, but also a good delivery of power. I found, generally speaking, the previous editions and the Ezone 98 generally would always work well with players who had a combination in their shots between hitting some spin but also wanting to flatten out with a degree of accuracy and power. It would often work particularly well, perhaps that individual who had a relatively spin orientated forehand and a flat backhand. That's not too dissimilar from my game, and certainly that carries over to this. However, if you are that category of player, then I would highly recommend that you string with a spin orientated string and go down in your tension a little bit. The Ezone's 98's launch angle is not the highest, and if anything, I think that this edition's is a little bit lower than the previous, perhaps to do with those frame changes. So there is the potential risk, if you don't play with a lot of insurance over the net, that you're going to hit the net a little bit more. But that was really adjusted and changed quite nicely for me by stringing with Yonex Polytour Spin at £50, and I felt that to have a really almost perfect blend of power, spin, control and comfort. So I'd highly recommend that string in this frame. In terms of serve, that would be the other thing that I was concerned about when I saw the beam being widened and the expansion of the frame at the top a little. But happy to say that this remains, in my opinion, one of the best serving frames that you can get. It's got that nice blend of power but also accuracy, and it's also versatile enough to hit some good slice as well as flat serves and kick. And some of that is down to the aerodynamics in the throat of the Ezone, but they haven't widened it so much that it slows the tip down on serve. I think possibly you might notice a percentage difference on serve compared to the previous. I do think there's a bit more energy return on serve, but this still remains an awesome serving frame. So the update is certainly an update that has delivered some significant changes. I'm not a fan of the paint job, not that I think that's particularly important. I found that 70% love it, about 30% don't, but I don't think that's going to affect the popularity of this frame. I think that if you're someone who is optimized to hitting with that isometric head shape and you're looking for a blend of power and control, this remains probably one of those leading frames out there. Just be careful on that launch angle. If you're not optimized on isometric head shapes and you do better with a little bit of launch, then of course the 98 Pure Aero, or indeed the VCore 98 or the Extreme Pro from Head could be strong competition to it. But make sure you string it right. This is an interesting update if you're optimized for this type of frame. Hope that is helpful. See you in the next one.